For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon Derehove. I'm speaking to political analyst Aubrey Matshiqi, who is discussing Cosatu's Congress, which was held recently in Johannesburg. How do you think the August killing of striking mine workers at Marikana impacted on the recent Cosatu Congress?
Well, to the extent that the tragedy in Marikana highlighted the social distance between union leaders and workers, Cosatu was forced at its Congress to focus on the tragedy and what it means organizationally for the Labour Federation. For instance, in its own documents, Cosatu has conceded that some of the political work it has been doing, particularly as it pertains to internal ANC battles, has compromised the work they should be doing to some extent on the shop floor. And according to a survey Cosatu commissioned prior to the Congress, the issue of political engagement is not very high on the agenda of workers. What workers seem to want is for Cosatu to fight for higher wages and to fight for better working conditions and job security. To that extent, it seems Cosatu has been sensitized to the need for a healthier balance between shop floor issues and political engagement.
Even though deep divisions remain, Cosatu's Congress re-elected its leadership without contestation. Why do you think Cosatu adopted this approach, and do you think it will generate true unity?
I think strategically, Cosatu had to make a choice. Do they prioritize at their Congress issues over which there may be divisions? One such issue is the leadership question in the ANC, whether Cosatu should support the re-election of Jacob Zuma in Mangaung or not. I think what they opted for are those issues over which there was the potential for maximum unity. So they decided to prioritize an approach which would maximize unity, hence the need for continuity and therefore the re-election of the entire top leadership unopposed.
Zwelinzima Vavi's political report characterized the ANC-led alliance as being in an emerging multiple crisis, including a crisis of legitimacy. The tone of the report was extremely critical and provocative. Does this not contradict calls for unity and closing ranks in the ANC-led alliance?
I must say, I found the political report contradictory in some respects. Right at the beginning of the report, Cosatu talks about the gains they've made since Polokwane, and they also talk about setbacks. And when they address the setbacks, I suppose in order to avoid being critical of the Zuma administration and its failures and weaknesses, to the extent that they've identified setbacks, they blame those setbacks on what they call the remnants of the 1996 class projects, which is a code for those who support former President Thabo Mbeki. Whereas I think Cosatu should be much more honest that there is a gap between the expectations that were created in Polokwane, particularly the expectation that a Zuma administration would be much more sensitive to the policy desires of the left, including those of Cosatu, and would therefore shift the content of economic policy to the left. And that has not happened in any decisive way. And hence Cosatu talks about setbacks, but falls short of blaming the Zuma administration or President Jacob Zuma himself directly for the setbacks.
The Cosatu Congress called for a Lula moment. What is meant by a Lula moment, and what does Cosatu hope to achieve through it? Well,
in academic or scholarly terms, the Lula moment is a moment in which former President Lula of Brazil, dealing with the issues of poverty and inequality, put in place a set of policies that sought to ameliorate the conditions of the poor and the working class. One of the things, for instance, the Lula government did was to address the issue of income inequality. So at the bottom, we saw income rising, but at the top, they rose, but at a much slower rate, so that the inequality would be addressed. There are those in South Africa who argue that one of the greatest problems we have is that of inequality, particularly inequality. But they bemoan the fact that the South African government, under the leadership of the ANC, has not taken as radical steps that were taken by the Lula government in Brazil. Effectively, therefore, when the ANC's policy conference in June talked about adopting a radical program and adopting radical policies, that commitment is still at a rhetorical level and is not being reflected in the content of policy itself and how it is implemented. And the question is whether after Mangaung, we are going to see the ANC adopting policies that take the ANC government outside the current policy paradigm.
Do you think Cosatu will now strengthen ties with progressive civil society organizations, such as those campaigning for improved education or against corruption? Or will it become closer to the ANC and less critical of government failures?
Well, I think the Federation will do both. In the past, what the Federation has done is to align itself with particular campaigns and therefore elements of civil society that share the same goals as Cosatu with respect to certain issues. We saw that with regard to the antiretrovirals issue. We saw that with regard to e-tolling. So I even think that going forward, Cosatu will continue to identify opportunities for alignment at a campaign level with other sections of civil society. But at the same time, Cosatu going forward will be engaged in the struggle to enhance the operations of the alliance and to make sure that within the alliance they are able to maximize opportunities and make sure that the alliance delivers much better as far as the interests of the working class are concerned.
Why do you think the SACP has played a role in taming Cosatu, trying to keep it in line with the ANC, rather than radicalizing Cosatu as a vehicle for more powerful working class struggles?
Well, I'm not convinced actually that the SACP has succeeded in taming Cosatu. Actually, between the two, the one that is tame is the SACP. The SACP, over the past 3 years especially, has become less critical of the content of ANC policy. Look at how they almost uncritically accepted the content of the New Growth Path, while Cosatu was quite critical of the New Growth Path, while identifying the New Growth Path as a step in the right direction. So actually, it is the SACP, not Cosatu, that has become tame in its orientation towards the ANC and the policies of government.
After the successful conclusion of its Congress, what effect, if any, do you think Cosatu will have on the ANC leadership battle to be decided at Mangaung?
Well, the outcome of the leadership battle is going to depend on several factors. Remember, Cosatu will not be going to Mangaung as a voting bloc. And the question is, how many of those delegates will see themselves as representatives of a Cosatu mandate? The likelihood is that the majority of them, even if they are workers, will be making considerations about who they should vote for, mainly on the basis of decisions taken at the branch level, regional level, and provincial level in the ANC. So to that extent, on its own, Cosatu cannot influence the outcome of the leadership battle in the ANC. What is important is the policy battle, whether Cosatu will succeed in radicalizing the content of ANC policy. Because remember, after Mangaung, we will be 16 months away from the next general election. So even if Cosatu loses the policy battle in Mangaung, in the period after Mangaung and before the general election, I think what they are going to do is to try and force the ANC into an election pact and try and influence the content of the ANC's election manifesto. If past engagements in that regard are anything to go by, once again what we will see are rhetorical commitments contained in the manifesto which are not matched by what the ANC actually implements.
That was political analyst Aubrey Matshiqi discussing the recent Cosatu Congress.